The silence breaks. The signal that changed everything. Captain Jin Mora of the Viridian salvage vessel Distant Echo had spent 17 years combing through the outer reaches of known space, searching for ancient artifacts and lost technology. She was a Krell, a species known for their patience and methodical nature. Her science-scaled hands moved across the control panel with practiced ease as she monitored the sensor arrays. Nothing in her long career had prepared her for what appeared on her screens that day. The signal was old. Impossibly old. It pulsed with a rhythm that suggested intelligence, yet the frequency was unlike anything in the Galactic archive. Her three-fingered hand hovered over the communication button as she studied the readings. The signal originated from a region of space that every civilized being in the galaxy knew to avoid, the Soul Exclusion Zone. 8,000 years ago, something had happened in that small corner of space. The records were fragmented and contradictory, lost in the great data purge that had accompanied the formation of the current Galactic Council. All that remained were warnings passed down through generations. Do not approach the Sol system, do not attempt contact with the species called humans, do not investigate the barrier that surrounds their star. The reasons had been forgotten, but the fear remained. Jin stared at the pulsing signal on her display. It was growing stronger, as if something within the barrier was reaching out, calling to the universe beyond. She knew she should report this to the Council immediately, follow protocol, let others make the decision. But 17 years of hunting through cosmic debris had taught her that opportunities like this came once in a lifetime. She adjusted her course toward the signal. The Council's debate. 3 weeks later, Jin stood before the Galactic Council on Arcadia Prime, the administrative heart of civilized space. The chamber was vast, with representatives from hundreds of species arranged in circular tiers. The air hummed with translation devices converting thousands of languages into coherent meaning. She felt small standing in the center, illuminated by the harsh white light of examination. Chancellor Vex, a towering Tharn with 4 arms and skin like polished stone, leaned forward from his elevated seat. His voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. The council listened to Zhen's report in silence, but she could feel the tension building with each word. When she finished, the chamber erupted in debate. The traditionalists argued for maintaining the exclusion zone. Councillor Nephra, an ancient sylph whose translucent form shimmered with agitation, spoke in a voice like wind through crystal caves. She reminded the council that their ancestors had established the barrier for reasons that must have been sound, even if those reasons were now lost to time. To interfere would be to invite unknown danger. The progressives countered with logic and curiosity. Councillor Dravin, a young Oratee with bright orange scales and fierce intelligence in his golden eyes, argued that 8 millennia was long enough to maintain a quarantine based on forgotten fears. The signal suggested that whatever had happened to humanity, they had survived and were now reaching out. To ignore them would be to abandon the core principles upon which the Galactic Council had been founded: cooperation, understanding, and the pursuit of knowledge. The debate raged for hours. Zhen stood silently in the center, watching the fate of her discovery being decided by beings who had never risked anything for knowledge, who had never felt the thrill of uncovering something truly unknown. Finally, Chancellor Vex raised all 4 hands, calling for silence. A compromise was reached. One ship would investigate the signal. One captain would make contact with whatever remained of humanity. And if danger was discovered, the exclusion zone would be reinforced with technology far more powerful than the ancient barrier that currently surrounded Sol. Jin Mora, having found the signal, was given command of the mission. She accepted with a bow, hiding the excitement that made her scales ripple with color. Journey to the unknown. The ship assigned to Zhen was the Pathfinder, a diplomatic vessel equipped with both scientific instruments and defensive capabilities. Her crew was small but skilled. Torvin, a Krell engineer whose expertise with ancient technology was unmatched. LSS, a Viridian communications specialist whose empathic abilities could detect hostile intent. And Kale, a human-formed synthetic who had volunteered for the mission out of curiosity about his creator's namesake species. As they approached the Soul Exclusion Zone, the barrier became visible. It was not a physical structure but rather a distortion in space itself, a shimmering curtain of energy that bent light and warped sensors. Ships that had tried to cross it in the past had simply vanished, their signals cutting off mid-transmission. Zhen had studied every recorded attempt, looking for patterns, for weaknesses. She believed the signal they had detected was a key, a way through the barrier that humanity was offering them. Torvin worked tirelessly in engineering, modulating their shields to match the frequency of the signal. LYSS monitored the emotional resonance of the energy field, searching for any sign of aggression or trap. Kale stood on the bridge beside Jin, his artificial eyes processing data far faster than organic minds could manage. Together they approached the barrier. The Pathfinder shuddered as it touched the energy field. Reality seemed to flex and bend around them. Colors that had no names filled the view screen. Sounds that should not exist echoed through the hall. Jen gripped her command chair, her training the only thing keeping panic at bay. Then, as suddenly as it began, the distortion ended. They were through. The soul system spread before them, and what they saw made even Jen's disciplined mind struggle to comprehend. The system was alive with activity. Massive structures orbited every planet and moon, connected by streams of energy that pulsed like veins carrying lifeblood. Earth itself was encased in a lattice of crystalline platforms that caught and reflected the sun's light, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost like writing in a language of pure illumination. But it was not the technology that struck Jen most forcefully. It was the feeling of the place. The soul system felt ancient beyond measure, yet simultaneously vibrant and new. It felt like standing at the intersection of all possible times, past and future converging in the eternal now. Elwes gasped beside her, overwhelmed by the emotional resonance emanating from Earth. It was not hostile, but it was powerful. Powerful in ways that defied measurement. First contact. A vessel appeared on their sensors, approaching at speeds that should have been impossible. It was sleek and elegant, designed with an aesthetic sensibility that spoke of a culture that had spent millennia perfecting both function and form. The ship took up position alongside the Pathfinder, matching their velocity with casual precision. A communication request came through. Elwes's hands trembled as she opened the channel. A face appeared on the view screen, and Jun found herself looking at a human for the first time in her life. The woman had dark skin marked with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Her eyes were deep brown, but there was something in them that suggested she was seeing far more than just the bridge of the Pathfinder. She was seeing through time itself. The human woman smiled, and there was warmth in that expression, but also something else. Something that made Jin's scales tingle with instinctive wariness. When the woman spoke, her voice carried harmonics that should not have been possible from a single throat, as if multiple versions of her were speaking in perfect synchronization. She introduced herself as Warden Alara Chin, spokesperson for the Temporal Collective of Earth. She welcomed them to Soul System with words that were courteous and formal, but underneath the politeness, Zhen detected something that chilled her: amusement. The humans had been expecting them. Not just expecting their arrival, but expecting this exact moment, this exact conversation, as if they had watched it unfold countless times before. Warden Chin invited Zhen and her crew to Earth's surface, promising answers to questions they had not yet thought to ask. She promised revelations that would change their understanding of reality itself. And she promised that when they left Soul System, they would carry with them knowledge that would reshape the entire galaxy. Zhen accepted the invitation, though every instinct screamed warning. As the Pathfinder followed the human ship toward Earth, she wondered what secret humanity had been guarding for 8,000 years. She wondered what they had become during their isolation. Most of all, she wondered if the Galactic Council had made a terrible mistake in sending her here. Some secrets, she suspected, were kept hidden for very good reasons. Soon she would discover if humanity's secret was one of them. The truth unveiled. The city beyond time. The human shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with unsettling smoothness, as if gravity itself had been negotiated with rather than conquered. Zhen Mora pressed her scaled hand against the viewport, watching as clouds parted to reveal a world that should not exist. The planet below was impossibly green, covered in forests and oceans that sparkled with unnatural clarity. But it was the cities that made her breath catch in her throat. They were not built upon the land. They existed within it, through it, around it in ways that defied conventional physics. Structures phased in and out of visibility, occupying the same space at different moments in time. Buildings that were simultaneously ancient ruins and pristine towers, existing in all their temporal states at once. Gardens bloomed with flowers that opened and closed in rhythms spanning centuries, their life cycles visible as waves of color rippling through the landscape. Torvin, the Krell engineer, made a sound of distress beside her. His analytical mind was struggling to process what his eyes reported. Elwes had gone pale, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the temporal resonance emanating from every structure, every tree, every stone. Even Kale, the synthetic whose programming allowed him to process impossibilities with logical calm, stood motionless, his processors working at maximum capacity. Warden Alara Chin sat across from them, still wearing that knowing smile. She had not spoken during the descent, allowing them to absorb the reality of what Earth had become. Now, as the shuttle touched down on a landing platform that seemed to be made of solidified light, she finally broke the silence. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice carrying those impossible harmonics. "Welcome to the only place in the galaxy where time does not flow in a single direction. Welcome to the home of humanity, the species that learned to live between the moments." The Chamber of Convergence. They were escorted through corridors that hurt to look at directly. The walls seemed to contain memories, images of people who had walked these halls in the past or would walk them in the future, all visible simultaneously. Zhen focused on Warden Chen's back, using her as an anchor point in a reality that seemed determined to come apart at the seams. They entered a vast chamber that defied spatial logic. It was larger on the inside than the building that contained it should allow, stretching away in all directions toward horizons that flickered between different times of day. Arranged in a circle around a central platform were 7 figures, each wearing the same silver patterns that marked Warden Chen's skin. The temporal collective's leadership, Zhen realized. The keepers of humanity's greatest secret. One of them stepped forward, an elderly man whose silver markings seemed brighter, more complex than the others. His eyes were clouded with age, yet they held a clarity that suggested he saw everything with perfect precision. He introduced himself as Keeper Matthias Okonkwo, eldest of the temporal collective and witness to Earth's transformation. His voice was gentle as he began to speak, but the words he spoke were anything but gentle. 8,000 years ago, he explained, humanity had been a young species, ambitious and curious, reaching out into the galaxy for the first time. They had encountered the architects, an ancient race that ruled much of known space through their mastery of temporal physics. The architects had seen in humanity something that terrified them: potential. Humans, Keeper Matthias explained, possessed a unique neurological structure that made their consciousness naturally attuned to temporal fluctuations. While other species experienced time as a linear progression, humans perceived it as a vast landscape that could be observed, understood, and eventually navigated. The architects recognized this ability as a threat to their dominance. If humanity learned to harness their natural temporal awareness, they would become more powerful than any species in galactic history. So the architects had acted. They erected the barrier around Sol System, not to imprison humanity, but to prevent them from reaching their full potential. They hoped that isolation would cause humanity to stagnate, to forget their latent abilities, to become just another species struggling to survive on a single world. Keeper Matthias smiled, and there was sadness in that expression, but also pride. They did not understand us as well as they thought. Isolation did not weaken humanity. It forced us to look inward, to explore the one frontier that remained available to us: time itself. Without the distraction of galactic politics or interstellar trade, we devoted ourselves entirely to understanding our unique gift. And over 8,000 years we mastered it. The demonstration. Warden Chen stepped onto the central platform, and reality around her began to fracture. Zhen watched in horror and fascination as multiple versions of the woman appeared, each one slightly different, existing at different moments of her personal timeline. A young Qin, barely more than a child, stood beside a middle-aged Qin who bore scars from battles not yet fought. An elderly Qin, her hair white and her face lined with wisdom, stood next to versions of herself that flickered like candle flames, possible futures that might or might not come to pass. All the versions spoke simultaneously, their voices harmonizing into a chorus that made the air vibrate. This is what we have become. We exist not in a single moment, but across the entire spectrum of our existence. When a human of the temporal collective focuses their awareness, they can perceive and interact with any point in their personal timeline. We remember our futures as clearly as we remember our past. We can make decisions informed by consequences that have not yet occurred. We have become beings of pure temporal existence. The multiple versions of Chen collapsed back into a single form, the process leaving Zhen dizzy and disoriented. LSS had fallen to her knees, tears streaming down her face as her empathic abilities registered emotions from across thousands of years of human experience. Torvin's scales had gone gray with shock, and even Kale stood frozen, his synthetic mind struggling to process what it had witnessed. Keeper Matthias continued the explanation, his voice calm and patient as if he were teaching children. Every human on Earth now possesses this ability to some degree. Some, like the members of the temporal collective, have perfected it and can navigate time with complete control. Others experience it as enhanced intuition, as dreams of the future, as memories of events that have not yet occurred. But all of us are connected across time, existing simultaneously in all the moments of our lives. Zhen found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why? Why show us this? Why allow us through the barrier after so long? The 7 members of the collective exchanged glances, and in that moment, Jin understood that they were communicating across time, consulting with past and future versions of themselves before answering. When Keeper Matthias spoke again, his words carried the weight of inevitability. Because the architects are returning. They disappeared 8,000 years ago, fleeing into the far future to escape the consequences of their actions. But their journey through time is circular, and their path is bringing them back to this era. They will arrive in this sector of space within 10 years, and when they do, they will attempt to reclaim their dominion over the galaxy. They will enslave every species they encounter, bending all of civilization to their will. He paused, letting the implications sink in. We have seen this future. We have witnessed countless timelines where the architects return and the galaxy falls into an age of darkness that lasts for millions of years. We have also seen the timelines where that future is prevented, where the species of the galaxy unite to stand against the architect's tyranny. But those successful timelines all have one thing in common. Humanity is part of the galactic community, sharing our knowledge of temporal mechanics, preparing the galaxy for what is coming. The choice. Jin's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what she was being told. You have known this for how long? How many years have you watched us from behind your barrier, waiting for the right moment to reveal yourselves? Warden Chen's expression grew somber. We have been preparing for this conversation since the day the barrier was erected. We have refined our message across thousands of iterations, experiencing this meeting countless times in possible futures, adjusting our approach to maximize the probability that you will believe us and act accordingly. To you, this is your first time learning this information. To us, it is the culmination of 8,000 years of preparation. How do we know you are telling the truth? Torvin asked, his engineer's mind demanding evidence and logic. How do we know this is not some elaborate deception? Keeper Matthias nodded, as if he had expected this question because, of course, he had experienced this conversation before. You do not know. You cannot know with certainty. Time is not fixed, and even our ability to perceive future timelines does not grant us perfect knowledge. We can only tell you what we have witnessed across countless possible futures and hope that you trust us enough to act. He gestured, and the air in the chamber began to shimmer. Images formed, holographic projections pulled from temporal perception rather than recorded memory. Jin watched as the visions unfolded. Massive vessels emerging from dimensional rifts, beings of pure energy that commanded physics like servants, entire civilizations reduced to slavery in moments. The architects in their terrible glory, remaking reality according to their ancient design. But then the visions changed, showing different timelines. Species working together, sharing technology and knowledge. Humans teaching temporal awareness to allies who had never imagined such abilities existed. Fleets of ships from 100 worlds standing united against the architect threat. Futures where the galaxy survived, where civilization endured, where freedom was preserved through cooperation and courage. The visions faded, leaving the chamber in silence. Jin looked at her crew, seeing her own turmoil reflected in their faces. They had come seeking answers to an ancient mystery, and they had found something far more challenging: responsibility. The knowledge they now possessed would change everything. The Galactic Council would have to decide whether to believe humanity's warning, whether to accept their offered alliance, whether to prepare for a threat that might be real or might be an elaborate manipulation. Jin straightened, her Krell dignity asserting itself despite her inner chaos. I will take your message to the Galactic Council. I will tell them what I have seen and what you have explained. But I cannot guarantee they will believe, and I cannot promise they will act. Keeper Matthias smiled, and there was understanding in his ancient eyes. We know. We have seen the Council's debate across many timelines. Some versions of this meeting end with rejection and continued isolation. Some end with alliance and preparation. Some end with humanity revealing ourselves too soon, causing panic and division that weakens the galaxy before the architects arrive. This particular timeline seems promising, but the future remains uncertain. That uncertainty is what makes choice meaningful. Warden Chin approached Jen and placed something in her scaled hand. It was a small crystalline device that pulsed with soft light. This contains comprehensive data on temporal mechanics, a gift from humanity to the Galactic Council. Whether you choose to use it or not is up to you. Whether you choose to trust us or not is up to you. But please understand, we have seen what happens when the galaxy faces the architects unprepared. We have watched civilizations fall across countless timelines. We do not wish to see that future become reality. The return. The journey back to Arcadia Prime passed in a blur. Jin spent the time reviewing the data crystal, studying the principles of temporal physics that humanity had mastered. Torvin worked beside her, his engineer's mind fascinated by the technical specifications. LSS meditated in her quarters, trying to process the emotional weight of everything they had experienced. Kale stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars, contemplating what it meant for his creator's namesake species to have evolved so far beyond their original form. As they approached the Galactic Council station, Zhen considered how she would present her report. How could she explain what they had witnessed in ways that skeptical politicians would accept? How could she convey the urgency without causing panic? How could she advocate for trusting a species that had kept themselves hidden for 8,000 years while perfecting abilities that seemed more like magic than science? She thought of Keeper Matthias's words about choice and uncertainty. Humanity had given her information and tools, but they had not tried to force her hand. They had presented their case and left the decision to her and to the council. That restraint, more than any demonstration of power, convinced her of their sincerity. Chancellor Vex's voice came through the communication system, requesting her immediate presence before the full council. Zhen straightened her uniform and prepared to deliver the most important report of her career. Behind her, the Sol system receded into the distance, its barrier still intact but now permeable, a door that had been opened after 8,000 years of silence. In 10 years, if humanity's predictions were accurate, the architects would return. The galaxy had 10 years to prepare, 10 years to decide whether to embrace humanity's offered alliance or face the coming storm alone. Zhen did not envy the council their decision, but she knew what she would recommend. She had looked into the eyes of beings who existed across all moments of their lives simultaneously, and she had seen not threat but hope. Humanity had transformed themselves into something unprecedented, something powerful, something strange. But they remained, at their core, a species capable of cooperation and sacrifice. As the Pathfinder docked with Arcadia Prime, Zhen gripped the data crystal and whispered a prayer to God she barely believed in. Let the council be wise enough to listen. Let the galaxy be brave enough to prepare. Let humanity's predictions be enough to save them all from the darkness that was coming. The future was uncertain, as it always had been. But for the first time in her life, Zhen understood that uncertainty was not something to fear. It was something to embrace because it meant that choice still mattered, that effort still counted, that the ending had not yet been written. The doors opened and she walked forward to change the course of galactic history.